Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to Poem Praise 2 and Peace, and blessings be upon you and your family this afternoon. Now, we are going to go ahead and get into Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen. Now, for this particular take, we're on take number 6 here on Poem Praise 2. We are currently in chapter number 3, which is the truth about the first Thanksgiving. So without further ado, I'm not going to hold you too long, maybe 10 or 15 minutes at the longest. So, are you ready for it? Are you ready for it? Okay, let's go ahead and get into this take. The very death rates that some historians and geographers may find hard to believe, the Pilgrims knew to be true. For example, William Bradford described how the Dutch, rivals of Plymouth, traveled to an Indian village in Connecticut to trade. But their enterprise failed, for it pleased God to inflict these Indians with such a deadly sickness that out of 1,000, over 950 of them died, and many of them lay rotting above ground for want of burial. This is precisely the 95% mortality that McEvedy rejected. On the opposite coast, the native population of California sank from 300,000 in 1769, by which time it had already been cut in half by various Spanish-borne diseases, to 30,000 a century later, owing mainly to the gold rush, which brought disease, starvation, homicide, and a declining birth rate. For a century after, Catlin historians and anthropologists overlooked the evidence offered by the Pilgrims and other early chroniclers, beginning with P.M. Ashburn in 1947. However, research has established more accurate estimates based on careful contingent-wide compilations of small-scale studies of first contact and on evidence of early plagues. Most current estimates of the pre-contact population of the United States and Canada range from 10 to 20 million. None of my original 12 textbooks, most of which were published in the 1980s, lets its readers in on the furious debates of the 1960s and the early 1970s, telling how and why estimates changed. Instead, they simply stated numbers, very different numbers. As many as 10 million American adventurers proposed. There were only about 1 million North American Indians. Opened, OPINED, the American tradition, scattered across the North American continent were about 500 different groups, many of them nomadic. Like other Americans who have not studied the literature, the authors of these textbooks were still under the thrall of the virgin land and primitive tribe. Archetypes: their most common American Indian population estimate was the discredited figure of 1 million, which 5 textbooks supplied. Only 2 provided estimates of 10 to 12 million, in the range supported by contemporary scholarship. 2 hedge their bets by suggesting 1 to 12 million, which might reasonably prompt classroom discussion of why estimates are so vague. 3 omitted the subject altogether. The new books are even worse. None of them even raises the subject of population estimates. The problem is not so much the estimates as the attitude. Presenting a controversy seems somehow radical. It invites students to come to their own conclusions. Textbook authors don't let that happen. They see their job as presenting facts for the children to learn, not encouraging them to think for themselves. Such as approach keeps students ignorant of the reasoning, arguments, and weighing of evidence that go into social science. About the plagues, my 12 original textbooks told even less. Only 3 of them even mention Indian disease as a factor at Plymouth or anywhere in New England. Today, most new textbooks do include Old World diseases as part of the Columbian Exchange. It's about time. After all, in colonial times, everyone knew about the plague, even before the Mayflower sailed. King James of England gave thanks to Almighty God and his great goodness and bounty towards us for sending this wonderful plague among the savages. 200 years later, the oldest American history in my collection, J.W. Barber's Interesting Events in the History of the United States, published in 1829, still recalled the plague. A few years before their arrival at the Plymouth settlers, a very mortal sickness raged with great violence among the Indians inhabiting the eastern parts of New England. Whole towns were depopulated, the living were not able to bury the dead, and their bodies were found lying above ground many years after. The Massachusetts Indians are said to have been reduced from 30,000 to 300 fighting men. In 1633, the smallpox swept off great numbers. Unfortunately, the Pilgrims' arrival in Massachusetts poses another historical controversy that textbook authors take pains to duck. Textbooks say that Pilgrims intended to go to Virginia, where they existed an English settlement already. However, the first land they signed was Cape Cod, well north of their target, explains the American Journey, y'all. Because it was November and winter was fast approaching, the colonists decided to drop anchor in Cape Cod Bay. Winter's onset cannot have been the reason, however, for the weather would be much milder in Virginia than Massachusetts. Moreover, the Pilgrims spent 6 full weeks until December 26th scouting around Cape Cod looking for the best spot. How did the Pilgrims wind up in Massachusetts in the first place when they set out for Virginia? Violent storms blew their ship off course, according to some textbooks. Others blame an error in navigation. Both explanations may be wrong. Some historians believe the Dutch bribed the captain of the Mayflower to sail north, so the Pilgrims would not settle near New Amsterdam. Others hold that the Pilgrims went to Cape Cod on purpose. that does complete our 10-minute read right there. So stay tuned for, it's going to be take number 7 here in The Lies My Teacher Told Me. And I want for you to hit the like button, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell. You know when I'm coming with something new for you here on Poem Praise 2. But until then, I certainly want for you to be well, be blessed, be safe. It be at thy will. I'll talk with you soon. Here on Poem Praise 2. Till next time. Later, y'all.